Hello and welcome to the Omnex webinar, Conducting Functional Safety Audits and Assessments for ISO 26262. Today's webinar is being presented by Mr. Chad Kymal. Chad Kymal is the Omnex CTO and founder. Omnex is an international consulting and training organization headquartered in the United States. Over the course of Chad's successful career, he has served on the Malcolm Baldrige Board of Examiners and received numerous quality achievement awards, including the Quality Professional of the Year from the ASQ Automotive Division in 2005. Chad is also the president of Omnex System, a software provider for ISO 9001, 14001, 27001, and more. Take it away, Chad.
Miles, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Conducting Functional Safety Audits and Assessments for ISO 26262. So, just walk through a little bit about Omnex here. As I expect many of you have already attended Omnex webinars before. We're a company that's founded in 1985. We're headquartered here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. A couple of different things over our history helped us become who we are. One of the events is the rollout and support for Ford Motor Company in the emerging market strategy. We also did a lot of work with the semiconductor industry, with the industry organization called Semiconductor Assembly Council, helping the Southeast Asia suppliers. This and the current work we're doing with aerospace really helped Omnex become who we are today. We're a very global organization. We're very proud to say that there are customers we support in 26 different languages globally. All right, Miles, we should administer our first set of questions. Just want to know a little bit about all of you in terms of how you've heard about us and about this webinar. So let's get on with the webinar at hand. Omnex has been implementing, auditing, and assessing ISO 26262 since about 2009. We've been teaching a 5-day auditor and assessor course that we have just actually updated, and we're going to relaunch in October. So I'm in the midst of having just rewritten this class, and it seemed like a very timely subject to talk a little bit about what we call confirmation measures, the assessments, audits, and confirmation reviews that need to be done with ISO 26262 functional safety. I myself have done a lot of ISO 26262 assessments for the last 10 years, and very happy to be with you for the next hour. Here's the agenda we have at hand. We'll start with explaining two things in terms of what the standard requires. One, internally with audits, assessments, and reviews, and the second in what the standard calls distributed development. This is when we're co-developing an automotive project, functional safety project, with suppliers. The supplier could be doing hardware, the supplier could be doing software, and it lays out requirements that we have to do for our supply base in distributed development. After that, we'll talk about scoping and sampling and aligning with APQP, not just ISO 26262. Though I talk to you about ISO 26262, I want you to know I'm thinking ASPICE and cybersecurity standards. So anybody doing functional safety also needs to be thinking automotive SPICE, which is really now a de facto requirement for our software departments, and with cybersecurity standards. That single word cybersecurity in your RFQ actually means a lot more. And then we'll move on to audit trails and assessments. And as time allows, I'll take you to a little case study and talk about assessing the safety goal and following the audit trail of functional safety concept into the technical safety concept to the technical safety requirements. And then what we'll do is finish up with the auditor competencies. So let us get started with what the standard calls in part 2 of the standard confirmation measures. I'm not going to do a lot of different additional requirements of what is ISO 26262 and why we do ISO 26262. We have done other measures of the webinars of the same that we'll be happy to share with you if you just email us. What we'll do now, though, is go right into the standard and talk about this section called confirmation measures. Of course, when the standard says confirmation measures, they mean reviews, audits, and assessments. So it has taken me a while to really understand this slide. So and the biggest difference here is getting confused between audits and assessments. And fellow colleagues at Omnex have heard me challenge them in the difference between audits and assessments, and I've told them, look, when I do an audit, I'm also, achieving in great detail the work product. Folks, really though, there's a big difference between audits and assessments. Let's just look at the assessment, and we'll get a chance to dive deeper into it later in this presentation. The goal of the assessment is to study the safety goal and make sure that the safety goal is being met. So this is what they say: examination of the achieved functional safety of an item or element. And really, we will take an audit trail in this one, starting with the HARA into the safety goal, into the safety requirements, into the functional safety concept, and so on. I'll get a chance to talk to you more about this. What do we do in an audit? In an audit, the assumption is we have multiple projects and we're sampling these multiple projects. And the goal in an audit, we can do a lot more in an audit, folks, but the goal is to make sure that the process we're auditing is fully implemented. And then the standard, just like ASPICE, the ISO 26262 requires certain work products to be reviewed. Of course, ASPICE requires all work products to be reviewed. 26262, based on the ASIL level, wants certain products, work products to be reviewed. And of course, it says reviews can be supported by checklists. I'll talk to you about that a little bit more also. So let's move forward. So here then are the 3 different confirmation measures: the review, the audit, and the assessment. As I mentioned to you, let's look at the third column and let's look under the assessment. The assessment is evaluating whether functional safety is being achieved. It is really also what the safety case is trying to do. But of course, we're going to be doing this project assessment, and we'll get a chance to talk about when is the best time to do these assessments. And the idea here is, when you do the assessment, we have to do a recommendation, whether we accept it or we reject it. We'll take a look at it a little bit later in this presentation itself. And the idea is you can do it progressively during development or at one time. Let me bring this topic up even now. Many of our customers ask us to do the assessment kind of late. And then we find a problem with all these different work products that they have to fix. Really, is it in the best interest for the assessment to be done so much further in the product lifecycle, or should the assessment be done earlier when we can catch it and it'll be useful for them in their product development? All right. And the scope and the depth, you can see the work products required per the safety plan, the implementation of the required processes, so work products per the safety plan, implementation of required processes, and a review of safety measures. keep in mind the ISO 26262 has hardware metrics and software metrics, and these metrics have to be met, and it's part of the project assessment that we do that. So functional safety assessment then is really a project assessment. And Omnex will tell you when you do the project assessment, you can do a deep review of the work product, thus fulfilling the confirmation review and the assessment at the same time. The audit is similar to the IATF 16949 audits that we do. And these audits, you can actually integrate ISO 26262 and functional safety audits, and you're really trying to make sure that the implemented processes are effective. All right. Again, when we talk about the scope of the audit and the sampling, all three of these will get much clearer. Here are the minimum work products required in the confirmation review. You can see here, there's the idea of reuse of functional safety. In fact, you don't have to completely, look at every new project we have and redo the functional safety goal or safety requirements or the work products. With reuse, we can reuse many of the items. In fact, as you all know, Omnex has a software that allows reuse of APQP documents from DFMEA all the way to PFMEA and work instructions. Our functional safety software works the same way. We have the same family structure in the way it's built, and then when you create a new product under the same family, you immediately inherit all the work products of functional safety. So what do you then do? Is it just a repeat? No, you have to do an impact analysis. This impact analysis, folks, is very key, and you can see it's in red, and it's supposed to be, if you go to the next page, I deleted that slide. I3 requires a high level of independence. Okay, so impact analysis, looking at how much change there is in this new project from the previous similar project, is the impact analysis. And then we have to do a HARA, or we do the HARA under SCEOC, the safety element out of context. And again, and out of that comes the safety goal and the safety requirements. You can think of that as being embodied in the functional safety concept. The safety plan, of course, is the functional safety project plan, and all the way down to safety assessments and safety audits. All of these need to be for the confirmation measure. And you can see there's a I1, I2, and I3 are the different levels of independence that's required as the ASIL level goes from A all the way to a D. All right. So what are we talking about? We have to do audits, we have to do assessments, and we have to do confirmation measures. And folks, since at Omnex here, we do functional safety, we do ASPICE, and we do cybersecurity, SAE J3061, or ISO SAE 21434, which is a cybersecurity standard that's being developed. I'll just tell you, these are too few documents to be reviewing, especially now when everything is new. We should review a lot more than this. Okay, so assessments, audits, and reviews. When do you do audits? Well, the standard lets us off the hook for ASIL project. Well, not ASIL project. If you only have ACE in the company, you don't have to do functional safety audits. B, it's recommended. That's what the parentheses means. C and D, you need to do. If you're doing functional safety, you need to do audits as far as I'm concerned. You can see what the standard has to say. And you need to do functional safety audits, and the ISO 26262 will tell you whether you do audits or assessments, you need to have audit reports. All right. So a lot more on this functional safety assessment, and I can tell you right now, this is the one work product or task or process that we, the automotive industry, are not used to doing, similar to the ASPICE project assessments that we do. So folks, if you can just let me know whether your company has ASIL projects, we have a number of polling questions that we have asked, which will help me help you do a better job. So what kind of ASIL projects? Do you have ASIL projects? I don't think we've asked you whether it's ASIL A, B, or C, or D. All right. So functional safety assessments need to be done, and these are project specific. There's a functional safety manager who's responsible for planning it, and you need to have an agenda. Of course, the agenda is the assessment plan, and we need to have one or more persons appointed to carry out a functional safety assessment. And the scope of the assessment needs to include work products, processes, and ensuring that the safety goal is being met. Okay, that's what they call for the safety assessment. And as we mentioned to you, we think it's a good idea to combine the safety assessment and the confirmation review, so that you can, in the assessment, you can also look at the work product review, and it ends up being a deep dive in looking at the different requirements. All right, so the functional safety assessment definitely needs to look at the overall plan and also think about when are the confirmation reviews going to be done, when is the audit going to be done, when you look at the timing of the functional safety assessment. That's what the first bullet is talking about. And then the functional safety assessment report needs to include a recommendation. And what is the recommendation? Is it good and accepted? Is it a conditional acceptance, or is it a rejection? If it is a rejection, then you need to do the corrective actions, and then you have to repeat the functional safety assessment. So the functional safety assessment is a big deal, and we cannot really have, safety measures unless, cannot have a safety case, and we cannot say the product is safe until we have a successful assessment. All right, let's continue. So there are three types of reports that are expected in a ISO 26262 implementation: an audit report, assessment report, and a confirmation review. And depending on the level of independence based on the ASIL, it needs to be done. And the assessment and the audits are typically part of the safety case. So folks, that's the whole nemesis and whole idea in terms of why we're doing audits, assessments, and reviews. Number one, the standard requires it. Number two, it is very, very new in the industry. And number three, none of the auditors are really, really being trained as much as the engineer to do a successful assessment or an audit. We'll talk more about this when we come to the end of this section of this webinar, when we talk about the competencies. Let's talk next about distributed development. So what did we say distributed development is all about? The distributed development is about this customer-supplier interface that we have with the suppliers that of our parts that have functional safety. So if your safety goal ends up impacting, a subsystem, a hardware or software, and then they happen to be suppliers, they have to be included in an assessment or maybe even an audit. And what the slide is saying is, if you're a tier one, you have it on both ends. You have a customer-supplier relationship at the top, and then you have a customer, supplier relationship to your suppliers. Okay, and in the ISO 26262, the idea of suppliers is it's called distributed development, because that's what the supplier is doing, is development. So the idea of distributed development. Does that make sense? So this is just talking about the recursive relationship between the supplier, the customer, we the supplier, and then we as a customer to our supplier. Okay? That many of us, many of you have a dual relationship or two roles. So let's look and see what we need to have. What are the work products we need? We need to have a supplier selection report. Why did we pick the supplier that we did? The development interface agreement, DIA. The DIA is a project plan for functional safety between us and our suppliers, and it clearly lays out who is going to do what in this development, from the HARA to the safety goal to the safety requirements to the safety assessment, functional safety assessment, to the audit. Okay, so what do we need to have as work products? The supplier selection, the DIA, the safety plan, and a functional safety assessment report, and an overall supply agreement. So here are the clauses of the standard that define each of these. And folks, we'll definitely be auditing the distributed development when we do a functional safety assessment or a functional safety audit. But what I wanted to point out to you is that there is a requirement for a functional safety assessment of a supplier. That's in 545. There's also requirements for the supplier after release. So let us quickly take a look at it. I did delete some of the slides. Folks, so as I mentioned to you, to help the auditors and assessors get the competencies, in our 5-day class, we planned 3 days to give the auditors and assessors a hands-on workshop in evaluating many different work products. The last 2 days is actually about how to do scoping, how to do the assessment, how to do an audit report, how to write non-conformances for ISO 26262. In fact, the slides I'm sharing with you in this previous chapter and this chapter are part of the 4th and 5th day of the 5-day assessment and assessor course. In fact, this webinar is going to be a prerequisite for anybody attending our 5-day course, because we have 5 hours of material that we can't cover in the very beginning of this course. And part of that, the beginning of the 4th day and the 5th day, which is about auditing, and we're going to give it a self-study before they come in, and then we'll review it for them in a summary fashion. So you're actually looking at those slides. And in looking at time, I'm not covering all the requirements in this section 5.4 for the distributed development. So I jumped right to the development DIA. This DIA is a very important document. Folks, we don't really come up with an overall APQP plan with our supplier. It's not a requirement anyway of IATF 16949 that we sit down with our suppliers and come up with an overall project plan for APQP and PPAP. We do have deadlines when they need to be done, but there's no detailed development plan. But that's what this is. This is a detailed development plan for ISO 26262. It lays out very specifically who does what and when. And this is a negotiation between a supplier and a customer, between 2 safety managers, though I do see SQE role. The supplier quality engineer should take over the DIA. So is the supplier quality engineer and the company's policies on one end, and the safety manager of the suppliers. And they're tailoring ISO 26262 to to the project at hand, with a joint agreement on the documentation, the work products, and so on. Okay, so there are normally templates for a DIA. And then, what is the requirement of functional safety? This is in part 8 of the standard, and part 8 of the standard says it talks about regular safety assessments that should be carried out of your supplier. And again, it says for an element with the highest ASIL, and then they'll again say A, you don't need to, B is recommended, C and D you have to do. But it says the DIA will say who performs a functional safety assessment. Is it going to be done by the customer, or is it going to be done by the supplier? Or maybe even a third party like Omnex can go in and do the supplier assessment. The DIA needs to specify the planning of the supplier's functional safety assessment activities, and of course, a report needs to be provided. And this report and the work products of the supplier, whether it's a hardware supplier or a software supplier, is going to be an important part of the safety case of the customer in being able to say, yes, my product is safe. If there's a safety goal, the safety requirements to the functional safety concept and the technical safety concept impacts the hardware and the software, this needs to happen. Let's move on. So I skipped the first part of the DIA, parts A through D, and just went to this section here that talks about the functional safety assessment that needs to be done and the planning of the supplier's functional safety assessment report, I, J, and then K, right? All three of these lay out in detail what needs to be in the DIA and what is part of the agreement in the DIA between the customer and the supplier. All right. And it goes on further to say that the supplier needs to conduct the HARA. If the supplier needs to conduct the HARA, then the assessment of the HARA, which, as you all know, is the highest level of independence, shall be provided to the customer for verification and approval. And also, who is responsible for the concept phase needs to create the functional safety concept. They're saying this so that the customer doesn't, give away that responsibility that should be rightfully theirs if they're responsible for the safety concept, the concept stage, that they don't ask a supplier to do something that they really should. And folks, the requirements continue, and this reminds me actually of what we used to do prior to QS 9000, that after release for production, if there's a safety-related event, and the safety-related event could be that the hardware, let's say somebody manufacturing something that's being supplied to us, which is a functional safety, if the CPCPK is lost, and it is a safety-related event. And what needs to happen if there's a safety-related event, okay? So, all right. So that then is the requirements for internally, and also what we need to do for the supply base that comes in from functional safety. Let us switch over now and talk a little bit about how do we scope an audit or assessment. Number one, we need to know what is the item. When we say item, we actually mean what is the product, what is the description, what is the overall new product development project, okay? And then we need to know, is there a system, subsystem, hardware, software, or if there's a component there in the scope of this assessment or of an audit, okay? And of course, the scope is different for an audit, assessment, or a confirmation review. Well, the scope is not done. We need to continue asking more questions. What is the ASIL level? Do you have a safety goal? Do you have safety requirements? Did the customer give you a functional safety concept? You know, they very well could have. But folks, we are right now at a stage, even though, the earliest implementation was in 2009 and the standard came out in 2011. We are into the 7th or 8th year of after the standard has been released. We're still finding that, functional safety is relatively not so well understood in the automotive, industry. So the ASIL is a requirement that's coming in the RFQ without much clarity to the supplier. So not only do you need to ask these questions, we need to find out which parts of the standard apply. Folks, Part 2 and Part 8 are processes. Part 2, as you all know, talks about, I told you earlier, talks about the confirmation measures, which is the confirmation review, audits, and assessment. It's also the part that lays out the safety case, talks about the project safety manager, functional safety manager for the project. It also talks about competencies and so on. So Part 2 is very important, and Part 8 are support processes. Part 2 and Part 8, typically we say integrate with IATF 16949. Part 3 is a concept phase where you actually come up with the item definition, the HARA, the safety goal, and the safety requirements. And the functional safety concept is all in Part 3. And Part 4 is where you come up with a technical safety concept and the system development. Part 5 is hardware, Part 6 is software, Part 7 is manufacturing, and Part 9 is the ASIL decomposition and safety measures. So Part 9 de facto comes in, and Part 2 and Part 8, anytime you have any development, Part 2 and Part 8 automatically come in. The big question always is Part 4, 5, and 6, whether you have hardware, software, or system. Why is this important? Really important so we can do audit, assessment plan or audit plans, right? Okay, so what does a scope look like? And here's where we said, conduct an assessment for project ABC with a safety goal. We just made this up, no unintended acceleration, with an ASIL C. So it's an ASIL C project for this, and we should have put down the product number. Let me just do that right now. Product number and product name. It should be part of this project, the project ABC, okay? And then the scope, who's the customer, and where is the product development going to be done? So product development for the system, hardware, and software is in Oakville, Canada, and the software testing is conducted in India and in Mexico. Systems testing is in Mexico. Folks, this is what we're typically finding. So, we're finding software development typically being in India. Even if software development is not in India, the testing and the system testing, it's all, we have really distributed development in the way the automotive industry works, okay? And we also need to know what is a manufacturing plan. Now, the scope statement can lay all this out, and the assessment plan can just be for the development center in Oakville, or it could be for the development center and the manufacturing plant. In this, especially if it's just software testing and systems testing in India and Mexico, you can include that right into your assessment plan. All right. Next, we move on to the idea of sampling, but let me do this. Let me just pause here for a second, giving you a chance. I'm sure you have lots of questions, giving you a chance to write down some of the questions. All right, let's continue here. I see that we got several questions. We'll take all the questions in the very end here. What about sampling? In audits, the idea is that there are multiple projects, and the focus is whether a process is implemented or not. And the sampling for the process has to be across projects, okay? So you're going to be sampling multiple projects to find out, is configuration management working well? Do we have a safety plan across projects? Is validation going to be done? And the difference, though, between an audit and assessment is the focus in the assessment is all about one project, and we can follow this project from the very beginning to the end to ensure if the safety goal is being met or not. Okay? So the assessment is sort of doing what the safety case is doing in a write-up. And just a point here, it is important to indicate in our checklist or report what samples were taken and the results. I only say this because many auditors only write down non-conformances. We need to identify the samples we took, whether good or bad, okay? And samples, of course, are all work products. Question people often ask, when do we need to conduct assessments? We only need to conduct one assessment, the standard says, and when do I need to conduct it? Why not just do it in the very end? As I already mentioned to you, if you do it in the very end, you're going to have a lot of findings which are non-value added. So our thoughts are in this fashion. Number one, the folks who are designing your system, so I put this there that you should know the slide by heart. You should know it now because it's the functional safety, all right? The system here is being blocked by this gate review for APQP, and then you have hardware and software. So in the middle, if you can see my cursor, this is where the system is, this is hardware, and this is software, okay? And there's a big V here. There's a V cycle, right? And this V cycle is happening right here. You see that? In this APQP block, you actually have system, hardware, and software development happening, and that's why it's lined up in that fashion. But there are many requirements in ISO 26262, and if you're doing ASPICE, many requirements for the software that needs to happen with APQP and lined up with APQP. So number one, I asked this question, what is the auditor's expectation on alignment between APQP and ISO 26262, right? Should we align the gate reviews? Now, the gate reviews don't need to be aligned, but ISO 26262 development and the overall APQP development definitely needs to be lined up. And lack of that could lead to really structural issues. There's also the second point about, the ISO 26262 is asking for system, subsystem, hardware, software. It's called systems engineering structure. It's also what AIGVDA calls a structure analysis, right? So it needs to be done, folks. If you're going to implement ASPICE or ISO 26262, our product development will fundamentally change. All right. So the question here, though, was about assessments. Should we conduct an assessment and confirmation review of the work products at the same time? You already heard me say that's what I think is good. Shall we include all work products like ASPICE? I think that's a good idea. I think, at this time, when we're not really sure if people know what they're doing with the work product, it's a good idea to do that. And I'd like to suggest at least two assessments, one after the functional safety and the technical safety concept has been done. So one very early in the design cycle of the system and one right before the safety case, all right? Folks, I'm only saying this with the idea that the hardware and the software may be being developed somewhere else. I do believe assessments need to happen there also, you know, not wait till the very end, because again, if you wait till the very end, you'll end up with non-value added. And we're finding a lot of risk in the projects that we're a part of. Let's move on then to the next slide. This is another picture of the same picture that the system, subsystem, hardware and software development, whether it's internal or the supplier, needs to be lined up, folks, because there's a big V at the very top for the system, and there are small V's all the way around, and all of that fits into this phase 2 of APQP, right? So how is product development organized? How is the engineering V model accomplished? It's key questions the assessor or auditor needs to ask when they do an audit or assessment. And I'll just make one more thought here. You know, because we all know APQP very well, we know 26262 really well, we know ASPICE very well, and the new cybersecurity standard we are learning because, you know, Omnex, one of our consultants, is on the writing committee of the 21434. We know when we see this, we're looking at all of this, and we're looking at it not just 26262 and APQP, we're looking at ASPICE 26262 and APQP, and also with cybersecurity. All right, that's the way it needs to happen. So next, what we have are audit trails. This is coming from the class itself, that there's an audit trail from the safety plan to the concept phase. Actually, safety plan is in part 2, concept phase is in part 3 of the standard, and then system design part 4, part 5, and part 6 of the standard. And there's a trail there, and the trail happens and needs to be lined up with the phases of new product development. All right, and so the alignment of APQP with ISO 26262 are some key thoughts, and a number of papers that I'm presenting right now. And if you're interested in looking at these papers, you know, please do write to Omnex. We'll be happy to share this with you. This audit trail is specifically important when you do a safety assessment. We're looking at this trail of safety goal, safety requirements, and the functional safety concept and the technical safety concept, right? Technical safety concept further decomposes into technical safety requirements in hardware and software. Folks, I think it's in the previous slide. Well, maybe it's in the next slide. I just continue calling it TSC and for the software and TSC for hardware. All it is technical requirements decomposing into becoming more and more specific as it goes further down. And auditors and assessors need to keep in mind that when the requirements come down and testing needs to go up. In fact, this testing strategy and the integration of the testing is a very important concept, and it's a work product that's included in the confirmation review. And also in ASPICE, it's a base practice, and we need to clearly understand, you know, even in software, there's the overall system and the system architecture. So the overall system requirements that meets the technical safety requirements from the system. So the system requirements of the software, then there might be modules of the software, and then there'll be software programs. And the requirements decompose 3 times inside software itself, all right? So when it decomposes, the testing needs to be in line. So the key in this testing, it's building on this integrated product as it builds up all the way up to the vehicle level at the customer, okay? All right. So there's a bidirectional traceability. ISO 26262 requires an identifier from the safety goal all the way to the requirements, including test documents. Okay, so you can see, I think some of this maybe you need to have experience in doing it to understand the significance what I'm talking about. Let me just tell you, in one of my audits, the software unit testing was done off requirements, and the software was coded just based on the system requirements. And then they are testing all along with only one level of requirements. And the question was, how do you know what is the software hardware integrated testing, or the software module testing, interface testing, or the subsystem testing, or the systems testing? Usually there's an architecture and there's overall requirement. So it's an interim, there's testing interim. How do you know you're testing to those requirements if you don't have those requirements? Okay, so it's like a major nonconformance. So system level, there is requirements and testing. Hardware has the same, and then software has the same. All right, software at least needs to have overall system requirements for software, or architectural design, and then maybe a module design, or maybe it goes right into unit testing, depending on how the software is being built, right? So what do we have then? These safety functions and safety requirements have to end up as characteristics that shows up in the process flow, PFEMA, control plan, and then process capability requirements in manufacturing. And folks, the traceability has to go to that level of detail. All right, we're almost in the end here. So let's finish with the auditor and assessor competencies. In fact, these were key discussions for us when we designed our course. It has taken me many years to really understand the fundamental difference between auditors and assessors. And I would take actually a little bit of offense when they said assessors were any different from auditors. Of course they are. The assessors have to ensure the safety goal is being met and need to have a deeper understanding, a technical knowledge of the product. Okay, so they have to have a deeper understanding of all the different work products. I'm not saying the auditors need to know any less, but the auditor's goal is fundamentally different. So let me summarize, and then what we'll do is we'll go to the questions and answer the questions. Let me give you a minute or two here for any new questions you may have. And I see a number of questions here. So the 3 confirmation measures in functional safety: audits, assessments, and confirmation reviews, all of which need to be done by auditors and assessors. Okay? Functional safety has requirements for systems, hardware, and software in parts 4, 5, and 6. ASPICE also covers some of the same ground, and so does IATF. So auditors and assessors and organizations may have a chance to align these audits and assessments. When you do assessment or audit, you need to think carefully about the scope of the audit planning, including audit trails. And then lastly, as auditors and assessor competencies are quite specific, and the Omnex Functional Safety Assessor and Certification class that we developed with this thought in mind. With this said, let me just, before we go to the questions, tell you about some of the public training we're planning. The first time we're planning to offer the redesigned course is in October. We have functional safety certification courses, an overview of functional safety for engineers or project managers, functional safety auditor course, assessor course, ASPICE courses, our functional safety series, We have a number of new courses we have added, including what we call the new core tools for functional safety. Folks, with that, let me go to the questions. How many days is needed for a complete assessment or audits? The rule of thumb is to add a day for each part. Okay, so it varies depending on the scope of the audit. There is no one answer that we can give in terms of how many days. So once you have the scope and you identify, the parts, you are able to estimate how many days the audit can be. Should a traceability measure that enables proper field monitoring process and recall process be assessed during the assessment? Traceability is required in the FMEA, in the process flow and the control plan, and in the inspection records and the process capability records. Yes, absolutely. Traceability follows itself all the way to manufacturing, and you need to ensure that the safety characteristics that make up the safety requirement that makes up the safety goal is being met in manufacturing. Okay, so let me take on one more question. What is the role of IEC 61508 with respect to functional safety assessment during ISO 26262? This is a question I can actually ask my colleague, but I can tell you right now, there is no role. The ISO 26262 was developed from the IEC 61508. There is no role really for IEC 61508 in 26262. Okay, folks, with that, I hope this webinar went well for you. I see a couple of comments here in terms of the polls, and we'll try to do a better job on that in the next webinar. Folks, thank you very much for joining us. I welcome you for the other webinars that we're planning to hold or other Omnex training. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye now.